Hi guys, my name is Tanner Atkins. I'm the 4-H specialist for Franklin and Gaston counties here in Missouri, and today's project pointer is going to be on measuring basics. And so let's jump in with this. So first off, these three things that I have set out here are pretty common in the baking world. We use them throughout a lot of the things we do in the kitchen. The first one we start out with is our dry measuring cups. So think of a cup, a half cup, a fourth a cup. Those are all the things. These are what you're going to measure when you think of like flour and sugar and brown sugar. A lot of that will come from the dry goods that you're measuring, so dry measuring cups. Then we have common liquid measuring cups, and we're measuring water, oils, milks. This is the type of measuring cup you'll use. And then we also have measuring spoons. So when we get something that's quite a bit smaller than the dry goods over here, or even some liquids that we need a very small amount of, we use measuring spoons. So think of like tablespoons and teaspoons, and even half teaspoons are very common in this type. So these are the three things that we'll use throughout today as we cover these project pointers for measuring. Okay, we'll start with liquid measuring, and liquid measuring is one of the easier types of measuring we have. Really, you need to remember two things. One, make sure your measuring cup is set on a level surface, and then when you're going to pour your liquid into your measuring cup, make sure you bend down to look and see where the lining exactly is. And so when you're doing this, you're gonna bend down like this. I'm gonna fill to the half cup mark here and pour it in. And once you're bent down, you'll be able to see when it gets exactly to the half cup mark. And I've done that there, and that's how you measure liquids. Now we're going to move on to some of our dry measuring. And so one of the most common types of dry measures you're going to make is with flour. And so when we're measuring flour, what you want is your flour container or whatever you have your flour in, your measuring cup, and then something that can collect the flour once you scrape it off the top, and then your knife to also scrape that off. And so when we're doing this, we want to take our scoop or spoon, whatever we're using, go in and get some flour, and we'll fill this until it's heaping high. One thing to think about when this though is don't tap or push the flour down. This causes it to be packed, and we don't want that because it can cause our baked goods to be tough or dry with too much flour. And so I've got a heaping pile here and on all sides, and then I'm just going to take my knife and go straight across the top. And then that is what I'm left with my 1 cup of flour. So if a recipe asks for sifted flour, make sure you sift before you measure. If you don't have a sifter, then once you get a full cup, you can take off 2 even tablespoons of flour to get your sifted amount. When we use this, so I'm going to throw this back in here, but you see I have some extra flour on my wax paper here. But when you do this, this is why you use wax paper or a plate, so then you can put your excess back in your container for later. Your sugars are another dry ingredient that you'll use quite often in the kitchen when you're measuring out amounts. When we look at white sugar or granulated white sugar, this is going to be a similar packing to what we did with flour. Level your cup up with it and then scoop off the edge. With granulated white sugar, make sure you have broken up any clumps you see in the sugar before you measure it. When we move on to brown sugar, with this, you're going to actually pack brown sugar. So I'm going to take out my brown sugar here and start to fill up my half cup here. With this, like I said, you'll actually want to pack this down, and you can pack it down with with a spoon that I have here, or you can actually use your washed hands if you've done that. And so once I get this all leveled up here, then I'm going to take my knife and and scrape off the top again. And so one thing about brown sugar is when you mix it out, then it should keep its shape since you've packed it down. Now when we're moving on to some of your measuring spoons like we talked about earlier, we can use different dry or wet items with this depending on what the ingredient calls for. One of the most common ones you'll be able to use teaspoons or tablespoons for is baking powder and baking soda. And we have to be very particular on these two types because they can really affect how the good will be baked in the end. Its texture, how much it will rise, all those things are affected by baking soda and baking powder. So when we're doing this, it's pretty similar to when we're doing flour, except for some of these, you want to make sure that it's all kind of broken up in there, you don't have any clumps, and then you can actually, some containers, you'll be able to smooth the top off as you come out. If your container isn't like that, like a cardboard container, you'll do the same as with the flour. You'll take a heaping amount out and then scrape off the top that then you can put back in your container later. The last thing I wanted to cover today is about butters, margarines, fats, lards, those kind of things that we use in all of our baking. When we're using these, a lot of, if you're buying sticks of these, a lot of times they have marks on there that actually tells you how much is in each, which is super helpful. When you buy tubs and different larger containers of this stuff though, you might have to measure these out. So we're going to show you how to do that. So when we get in here with butters, and you're going to make sure that you let it set out for a while so it's malleable and you can work with it, and you're going to press that into your container. So with these, you're going to want to make sure you're using dry measuring cups or spoons so that you can level it off in the end. So I'm going to stuff this full in here, and then once I get this all full in here, I'm going to heap it high like I did with flour or anything else, and then scrape off the top back into what you would have a normal container of this stuff with. And you'll want to make sure that you do press this down to get rid of all of the air pockets in it as well. So I've pressed that down. I'm going to take my spatula and scrape off the top. And so then you have a container full of 2 tablespoons of butter. So the most important thing to take away from today is to make sure that you take your time and accurately measure out whatever ingredient you're using. It's super important that we stay consistent so our recipes turn out the way they're supposed to be. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we hope you tune in more for Project Pointer.